מזמור לדוד, אדוני רואי לא יחסר, בנותש יביצני, על מי מנוחות ינהלני, נפשי ישובב, ינחני במגלי צדק, למען שמו. גם כי אלך בגיא צל מוות, לא ירא רע, כי אתה עמדי. שבטך משענתך, המה ינחמוני. תערוך לפני שולחן, נגד צורריי, דשנת בשם מראשי, כוסי רוויה. אך טוב וחסד ירדפוני כל ימי חיי, ושבתו בית אדוני לאורך ימים.
As Cantor Schiffman began our service chanting the words from the Bible, Psalm 23 in the Hebrew, we'll now recite them in the English. You're welcome to join me. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He guides me in straight paths for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou hast anointed my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We read in the book of Proverbs, L'kol zman ve'et l'kol chefetz tachat hashamayim. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. There's a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing, a time for refraining, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. We gather here today to bring great love and admiration as we pay tribute and say goodbye to our beloved Mannie Schneider, a beloved son, a beloved brother, a beloved husband, a beloved father, grandfather, great-grandfather, a survivor, and a friend. The rabbis of the Midrash teach that the days of one's death should be more precious than the day of one's birth, and they compare our lives to that of a boat. And that they say when a boat leaves the port, oftentimes there's much fanfare, bands gather, there are parades, confetti, streamers, sending that ship out into the harbor. But the rabbis question this. They say, why is it that moment when we celebrate? For no one knows what seas and storms are in its path, what obstacles we'll find, what challenges are there in front of them. The rabbis say that it's a time when the ship returns home. That is when we should celebrate. Oftentimes the ship comes home to an empty harbor, an empty port, no fanfare there, just porters carrying off cargo and luggage. But the rabbis say that when a ship returns home in peace, that is when we should give thanks and to celebrate. We know that Mannie had hardship in his life, many obstacles which we'll reflect on and talk about, but we can all say that he has departed from this world at the age of 95 with a good name, and he's returned in peace. He's left behind many in mourning, his children, Albert and Friedel, Gloria and Michael, the apples of his eye, his grandchildren, Len, Brad, Alyssa and Jeffrey, David and Sydney, Stacy and Daniel. The diamonds in his crown, his great-grandchildren, Kenora, Brendan, Emma, and Ethan. Mannie now joins his beloved wife of 52 years, Esther. His brother Joseph, his sister Genya, and all of those murdered in the Shoah. His parents of blessed memory, Avram and Ita, his brother Fishel, and all the other extended family. And we pray up in heaven that they are all reunited once again in their eternal home. At this point, we have some very special tributes brought by the family. First, I'm going to call up grandson David.
Mannie Schneider, my papa, or as my son Ethan knew him, Grandma's dad with the birds. He was proud, he was stubborn, he was caring. For as long as I can remember, Papa loved cars. He had cool cars over the years, except for the Buick. That car, oddly the one he wanted to give me, when I started driving was maroon, and it was not cool. More specifically, Papa loved to buy new cars, not because he needed one, but because he liked knowing that he could buy one if he wanted to. Driving was an important part of Papa's life. He drove my grandmother around because she never learned how to drive. He would pick me and my sister up from school if we were sick and needed him, which is why it was no surprise to me that ensuring he had an up-to-date, valid driver's license was very important to him. I remember getting a phone call from my father when Papa was about to turn 90. His driver's license was about to expire, and he demanded that my father and I take him to get it renewed. Did he need a driver's license at 90? No, not technically. A state ID would have been sufficient for most people. But again, Papa was a proud man. Having a driver's license was important to him, and I am sure having one would have really upped his street cred with his friends at Stone Gardens. So I said to my father, sure, why not? This should be interesting. And I headed over to pick up my father and then over to pick up Papa. So quick recap. Papa's almost 90. He lives in Stone Gardens. He has really no way to leave on his own. And he hasn't had a car in years, but he must have a driver's license. So imagine the scene as we stroll inside the BMV. Papa, walker at the ready, flanked on either side by me and my father, his entourage. He's clearly ready to take on the world. Luckily for Papa, my father, in advance of it being Papa's turn, advocated on his behalf with the woman at the BMV, and wouldn't you know it, miraculously, Papa managed to pass the vision test, and more shockingly, the hearing test, even though I'm pretty sure he had left his hearing aids at home that day. Speaking of hearing aids, I mentioned he was stubborn, right? Well, if you asked Papa, he could hear great. Honestly, I'm not sure I can remember, even as a child, a time when the hearing aids were working properly. I'd also venture a guess that everyone in this room has heard Papa state, "Wuss," in the midst of a conversation with him at some point. I distinctly remember my mother telling me about a time Papa was having issues with his hearing aid and thought he could fix it on his own by cleaning it in a glass of water. More recently, Papa's TV broke and he could no longer change the channels. My mother and I ran out and bought him a brand new LED flat screen TV, drove over to Stone Gardens so I could set it up for him and teach him how to use it. I got the TV hooked up, turned on Channel 5 in full high-definition glory. Papa leans over to me and he marvels at the beautiful picture. Proceeds to ask me, however, if the TV was broken, because doesn't it have any sound? The TV volume was at 35 and you could hear it down the hall. Although he couldn't hear, he was still sharp as a tack. I showed him the buttons on the remote and he instantly turns the volume up to 100. It's not a joke, he really did, and drove us out of the room. So he couldn't hear anything, but it didn't matter to him. He just wanted to spend time with the people he loved. When it was still easy enough for him to get out and walk around, I would often pick Papa up and take him to lunch. His favorite restaurant, Red Robin. While he did seem to love a good burger, as he put it, his first love was French fries. and Red Robin would keep those baskets coming for him. I'm sure he'd be happy to know that his great-grandson Ethan is also a lover of the French fry. But more than anything, though, Papa was incredibly caring. He lived through extreme tragedy and hardships during the Holocaust. He lost most of his family, which is why the family he built after the war was so obviously the most important to him. Growing up, there wasn't a time I can remember when Papa wouldn't be there for my parents, for me, or my sister. Although he's not a practicing Jew, he was very proud to be Jewish, and Judaism was important to him. I recall clearly how proud he was of me at my bar mitzvah. I recall telling him I met a nice girl at college, my now wife Sydney, and his only question was, "Is she Jewish?" My mother also indicated to me that Papa apparently had some concerns about my now brother-in-law Dan. Papa took pause initially due to Dan's baldness, of all things. But the concerns were quickly alleviated upon finding out that Dan, too, was Jewish. I recall the excitement Papa expressed when Sydney and I told him we were expecting a baby boy and that he'd be a great-grandpapa. Papa was blessed with getting to know not one but 3 great-grandchildren. And if you get a chance to see any of the photos of my Papa with my son Ethan, or Alyssa and Jeff's kids Emma and Brendan, you can clearly see how much he loved them. For Papa, family was everything. He loved when Albert and Friedel would come from Detroit to visit with him, with their kids Lenny, Brad, and Alyssa. He also enjoyed his almost daily visits from my mother, Gloria, the most caring and patient daughter in the world. Side note, she's also an amazing mother and super grandma. My mother would drop everything and anything she was doing to ensure that Papa had what he needed. Ginger ale? Check. Sweaters? Check. Bananas? So many bananas. My mother helped hold things together for Papa, and because of that care and attention, we were all able to enjoy and share his company for so long. Papa was also one to make sure to remind you of the weather, good or bad. It could have been 75 degrees and sunny, and Papa would ask, "Do you have a little jacket?" It didn't matter if you were a little kid or a grown adult. He was concerned for those he cared for. I could go on all day here with the great stories about Papa, but I'm going to stop here and just say this. Don't worry, Papa. I know it's raining, and yes, I brought my little jacket.
Now I'll share words from granddaughter Stacy. I will truly miss my grandpa. 95 years old. Wow. He was a great guy, and I love that he was my papa. Because of him, I will never forget to wear a little jacket when going out, and will continue to be a fan of the Cleveland Browns for the rest of my life. I was so lucky to have him in my life. These are a few things that I remember. When we were little kids, I remember Papa was always there for my brother and me. When my parents were at work and we got sick at school, Papa would be right there to get us. He would pick us up in what seemed to be a new, snazzy, always gold color car. I remember sleeping over and watching Golden Girls or Empty Nest with him and my grandma. Something I remember most when staying at my grandparents' house was Papa's amazing knife skills. He really knew how to cut a fruit or vegetable. I was truly mesmerized by the way he sliced apples and pears. Fruit always tasted better when Papa prepared it. Once Papa moved into Stone Gardens, you always knew he was home because you could hear his booming, loud TV as you rounded the corner on the second floor. He really knew how to maximize the volume on any TV. I loved his relationship with my husband, Dan. Papa welcomed him into the family. I loved that they had this special bro-like handshake. They liked talking shop, a.k.a. sports. Papa loved talking about Cleveland sports. He was incredibly knowledgeable about the history of the Browns, and he was a diehard fan. He loved talking about composers and classical music he grew up listening to. He particularly liked Strauss waltzes. We thought it was a good idea to go out and get him some CDs and gave him a cool 1990s portable CD player. Smiley face. Although he appreciated it, it didn't work out so well. We all knew Papa had no idea how to use the CD player on his own. My Papa loved his family dearly, but the relationship he had with my mom was incredibly special. Whenever Dan and I were in town, he would always tell us how she was the best daughter. He loved it when my mom brought over the simple things he loved so much: peaches, apples, bananas, and ginger ale. And no matter how many times my mom was with him in a week, he would always say, "You know, you can always stop by more often." I loved that every time I called him on the phone, he always knew it was me, even though he was hard of hearing. He loved to know about L.A., about the weather, and when I was coming home to Cleveland next. A good piece of advice that will always stick with me is, quote, "You win some, you lose some. I love you, Papa." Signed, me, Stacy. A survivor, a hero, a mensch, a nice guy, kind, generous in spirit. Mannie was totally devoted to family, always smiling, a hard worker that loved everyone and that everyone loved. Quiet and calm, he was low-key. Surviving the horrors of the Shoah, Mannie, along with his beloved Esther, put a life together, built this incredible family, living modestly and frugally, making sure that the kids always came first, sacrificing so much that they could have a better life. Mannie liked to give you a big hug and a squeeze. Born in Poland, Mannie grew up in a small town near Krakow. His father worked at the sugar mill there, but during school time they lived in an apartment in Krakow where the kids went to school. Mannie was always proud of his father Avram. When the sugar mill owner fled Poland seeking safety, it was Avraham, Mannie's father, who was put in charge of the sugar mill. Just as Mannie was graduating from school, the Nazis invaded Poland and life changed forever. Mannie and his brother Joseph voluntarily entered the Plaszow labor camp where the Schindler Jews were. Always staying close with his brother, Mannie was put in charge of a detail to build new barracks. Commander Gott, you might remember him from Schindler's List, the movie, the horrible head of the camp, was not happy with the progress of the barracks and threatened to kill Mannie, aiming his gun at him. The story goes that Mannie responded and talked back to the commandant, saying, "I am in charge of the barracks, but it is the Poles who are doing the building. I am just a simple Jew. I can't tell Gentiles what to do." Amazingly, Mannie's life was spared at that moment. Moving from labor camp to concentration camps, together Mannie and his brother Joseph survived them all, including Auschwitz-Birkenau, and finally Dora. When they were liberated, Mannie was brought to the nearby Bergen-Belsen DP camp. Mannie always attributed his survival to the fact that he and his brother watched out for each other, that they were together. They would later find out that their sister Genya was safe. She was a hidden child, surviving by concealing her identity and attending Catholic school. She would be smuggled later into Israel, where she lived the rest of her life. Mannie did try to go back to Poland right after the war, but he was told not to go home, that it was not safe for the Poles were killing the Jews. In the DP camp, it's there where Mannie met his beloved Esther, who was also a survivor, the only member of her family to survive. And they were married with two other couples in a triple wedding ceremony in the DP camp, joining the Cronenbergs and the Griffels. Esther's wedding gown was black, because that was the only fabric they had available. Soon Mannie and Esther welcomed their son Albert, born in the DP camp. He was the prince of the family, the life they created from the ashes of the Shoah. In the camp, they trained for careers, and Mannie was trained as a policeman. Unfortunately, there were few vacancies for policemen in America. Joseph followed Genya to Israel, but Mannie and Esther would go to the States. An aunt in Cleveland sponsored them and gave Mannie a job in the family business, the fashion industry, at Quality Thread Company, which sold thread, buttons, zippers, and you get the picture, and so much more to brands like Bobby Brooks and stores like Joann Fabrics. Mannie started as a shipping clerk, but through his hard work, determination, wits, and talent, he became the manager. Mannie got along with everyone. People liked him, especially the buyers and the sellers. Mannie and Esther were devoted to each other. They were a team. He said, "Your mother was the smartest woman that I've ever met." Still back in the DP camp in Bergen-Belsen, when Mannie and Esther got notice that they could come to the States, they had one problem. Little baby Albert was sick. There was no penicillin in the camp, the DP camp, to treat him, to make him better. So Albert was sent to a German hospital, the Bremen Kinderklinik, but he was taken alone. Mannie and Esther weren't with him. But when they got notice, they wanted to go to the States, so they had to smuggle little Albert out of the hospital to begin their journey to America. They first lived here in Cleveland in a crummy apartment at 1134 Lakeview Road, and then moved up to Eddy Road. Albert was attending Hazeldale School. Mannie and Esther put the kids first, education always priority number one. They found a way to move to University Heights at the corner of Bushnell and Warrensville Center Road, near Harold Drug, across from Geraci's, so they could send the kids to Belvoir School and then Heights High. Both Gloria and Albert went to college and then law school, making Mannie and Esther so incredibly proud of both of their children. They came to the States with absolutely nothing. They never lived big, yet somehow they were always to take care of themselves and their kids, supporting themselves to the end, even if it meant having to take 2 buses to the Fairmount Picture Show. They didn't get a car for the first 11 years that they were in Cleveland. They welcomed Gloria to the family when they settled in Cleveland at the Eddy Road apartment. Gloria still remembers walking the streets of the neighborhood to the candy store. You told me that you both knew how much Mom and Dad suffered, so as children you never disobeyed them. Never said no, that you were good kids. It was easy, though, because your parents were great. Mannie was a very adoring father. He never yelled, never hit. He only got angry once. When Gloria was 4 years old, she was playing with a glass of milk on the kitchen table. Mannie, your dad, kept saying, "Don't play with that, don't play with that." And lo and behold, she knocked it over. The milk spilt everywhere. That was the one time that Dad got angry at you. Mannie's life was changed again when the grandchildren came, as you already heard from the love that David and Stacy shared. He forever became simply known as Papa. He was crazy about his grandchildren. When Lenny was born, the first grandchild, he was over the moon. He would do anything with you and anything for you. David and Stacy, growing up here in Cleveland, were so incredibly close to Papa, he'd drop everything for you. And he loved going to Detroit to see Lenny, Brad, and Alyssa. Papa loved the great-grandchildren. Whenever he'd see them, he'd light up. He'd set up shop by the birds, as David said at Stone Garden, and welcome the kids. At Stone Gardens, he'd always want you to stay and eat with him. He'd parade you around saying, "This is my daughter, my granddaughter, my great-grandson," and beaming with pride, showing you off, telling everyone. Gloria, you told me that though Dad still teased you and could get you going, you know that he appreciated that all you did for him. Whether it was picking up golden delicious apples that he wanted, or the Fuji apples that he wanted, or the bananas, you did everything. You and Michael, along with David, were his tech gurus, his geek squad. He loved his watch. David would fix it for him. He was a simple meat and potatoes guy. But Fidel, the daughter-in-law, not daughter-in-law, made something very special for him, chicken soup. He always loved when you made him chicken soup, and he'd say it was better than his own mother's. And Michael, the son-in-law, not son-in-law, he'd always brag, "Michael was my lawyer." Even though both Albert and Gloria were lawyers, it was Michael who he claimed was his lawyer. He loved you very much, all of you. Mannie had one extravagance, you heard already about it, his cars. First buying used cars when they finally could do it, and then new cars. That first one was the black Impala convertible with red and white houndstooth interior. He loved just getting cars, and then you know what he'd do? He'd give them away. He'd give them to Albert, to Gloria, to the grandkids. That's all he loved doing, was giving and sharing. He was known for one-liners like that little jacket one that you said, or when you'd ask him, how are you, he'd say, comme ci, comme ça. Active in Kol Israel, Mannie and Esther always got together with other survivors, often talking amongst themselves. Mannie actually never shared his story until years after his beloved Esther suddenly passed away 24 years ago. The family then wasn't sure if Papa would make it after losing the love of his life. He was the sick one in the couple, suffering heart attacks, getting pacemakers, always a bit of a medical marvel, always bouncing back. But after that huge loss, the loss of the love of his life, he was okay because of all of you, because of your love and support. And still his health was a challenge, battling, rallying to be with you as long as he could. The family is grateful for the years that Mannie spent with Louise Shapiro, a good friend and companion for so many years. They were good for each other, keeping them moving and active. Albert, you told me that Dad introduced you to your first love, the Cleveland Indians. I already said a huge sports fan. He grew up playing soccer, but that wasn't a sport that was active and popular here, so the Indians and the Browns became his team. Gloria, you'd ask Dad, it's Sunday, you're watching the Browns? He'd answer, I'm a bad loser. I can't watch the games anymore. But he watched. Mannie and Esther loved Israel. In fact, if you ranked their loves, it was family 1 and Israel 2. Mannie first visited Israel alone in the 60s, spending time with his brother and sister. And then in 1970, Esther and Gloria joined him there. Gloria, in fact, he would go on years later to go to college in Israel at Tel Aviv University. And it was a big thing that your parents let you go so far away, but they loved Israel, so they had to let you go and love that you went there. Mannie and Esther, with the little extras that they had from work, would always pack care packages for the family in Israel. Coffee, tea, whatever else they could buy that they thought was cheaper in the States, they would put in a box and continually send to Joseph and Genya and the rest of the family. Anything to make their lives a little bit easier in our homeland. Mannie was patriotic. He loved the USA. He'd often kiss the ground, grateful for the freedom and opportunity that he had here. A place not only to survive, but a place to build a family. Mannie always remained strong, thanks to the love and support of this family. You encircled him with love. You gave him everything that he needed. Made sure he had the best medical care, always taken care of with love and compassion, always the patriarch, the leader of this family. You've been by Papa's side all along the way, making him laugh, telling him jokes if he could hear you, simply holding his hand, telling him that you loved him. You should know how much he loved you, and I know how much you loved him. Today we can surely say that he has returned home in peace. May his memory always be for a blessing, and we say, Amen. We'll rise now for the memorial prayer, chanted by Cantor Schiffman.
אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מסעירים, את נשמת משה מיכה בן אברהם ואיתה, שהלך לעולמו, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו. אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתירהו בסדק כנפיך לעולמים, וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו. אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן.
Exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Mannie Schneider, Moshe Michel, who has gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of eternal life. May he merit the reward for living a righteous life. May he rest in peace, and we say, Amen. Please be seated. Following our service, interment will be at Mount Olive Cemetery, and then family will receive friends at the home of Gloria and Michael Gruen, 2876 Brainerd Road in Pepper Pike. Today until 8 p.m., tomorrow, Wednesday, from 2 to 4 and 7 to 9 p.m. Those that are going to the cemetery and then coming back to the house, our next door neighbor, the Broads, have opened up. They have a circular drive, and those that want to park, that can park in the circle up until, make sure that the straight path is open from the garage to the street, but the rest of the circle, you're welcome to park there. Friends who wish may contribute to J&F Jewish National Fund in Manny's name.